Okay, that's how we calculate these descriptive stats in Excel. So now let's take those stats and let's make a proper graph or figure of them. Um, the first thing we're going to learn is that when we're graphing, we're going to use a different measure of spread. And so we just learned how to calculate the standard deviation, which is very common, and it's a very useful measure of spread. But when we're graphing, there's another measure of spread that we like to use, and it's called the standard error. And I just like to use this for graphing, and so that's what we're going to use now. The standard error is nothing but the standard deviation divided by the square root of the sample size. And the thing is you've already got these two values. You've got standard deviation, we just calculated that, and we've got sample size. And so it's very easy to calculate standard error. And the reason that it's useful is because this combines both spread and sample size into one number. And so we always have to report all three: central tendency, sample size, spread. But here's a value that combines sample size and spread into one. And so that makes it more efficient, at least for graphing. Okay, and so let me show you how we're going to calculate the standard error in Excel, and then we'll come back and we'll learn how to graph it. Now, I've calculated the average, the sample size, the standard deviation. I want to calculate the standard error now. And remember, that's just the standard deviation divided by the square root of the sample size. So I'm going to go equals, and I'm going to select the cell that has the standard deviation in it. Divide by, and then I'm going to make an open parentheses, and I need the square root of the sample size. And so that's SQRT. And again, open parentheses, and I'm going to select the cell that has my sample size in it. And then close parentheses, and return. And there I have standard error. And I'm going to copy that formula over. And again, it's the same value, which is weird just because of it's not always going to be like that. Double click on this and you see what cells it's looking at. And so now I have everything I need to graph. Okay, see, that was very simple to use Excel to calculate the standard error. So now you have everything you need to make a graph. And so again, both the standard deviation and the standard error measure spread, but the standard error is better for graphing. And again, we've got the exact same value of standard error for both here. And that's very uncommon. It's just because of the way we collected data. Don't sweat that. It will not always be that way. Okay, now, we could make a table, we could report these numbers, and we'd be fine. But often it's better to make a figure. Humans are visual. We learn, it's easier to see trends. And so we want to make a figure from these data to make them easier to digest. And a very common, simple graph that's good for comparing means is a bar chart or a column chart. And so we're going to take the central tendency, spread, and sample size and put them all into a figure. We still must report all three things. One by itself is no good. Two by themselves is no good. You got to have all three, even if it's in a figure. But if we use the standard error and the mean, the standard error contains both spread and sample size, so then we would have all three things. And so what we're going to do is we're going to build a bar chart in Excel, and then we're going to take that and we're going to paste it into a Word document. And then that Word document will be your homework document, all right? And so it's just easier to paste these into Word, and then you can, add your text and your figure captions and that in Word. So when we look at the figures that you make, here's a list of things that we're going to be checking. And this is what you got to do to have a proper figure. You've got to have the proper type of graph, which it's just a bar chart this time. The axes need to be labeled, so I need to know what's on the x-axis, on the y-axis, and on the x-axis. I also have to have proper units, okay? And so you got to tell me, is this temperature? If it's temperature, is it in Celsius? Is it in Fahrenheit? So on and so forth. Excel automatically puts titles on the top of the graph. I hate them. You've got a figure caption. The figure caption tells you what's in that figure. The titles just seem to me to be obnoxious. So not everybody agrees with this. Not everybody does it this way. This is my class, and I hate titles. So don't put a title on your graph. Put all the information in a caption. But like we've been doing in all our other figures, you got to have a proper caption underneath. And of course, we're going to be looking for central tendency, spread, and sample size. Okay, so we're going to jump back into Excel, and I'm going to show you how to build a proper figure using the data that we've already calculated. All right, so let's go ahead and make a graph of these data. And so the main thing I want to graph here is the average, so I'm going to select those first. And now setting up the cells and setting them up properly to graph, that's a whole skill, but this works just fine the way I've got it set up. So I got the average selected. I'm going to come up here and go to Insert, and then I'm going to come over here to the charts, and I want a column chart. And so Excel calls the horizontal ones bar charts and the vertical ones column, doesn't matter. And so I'm going to take this simple one, this first one, and there I've got a chart, and you see that one bar is bigger than the other because one value is bigger than the other. All right, so now all we got to do is just fix the formatting on this chart. First thing I would do is come up here to Move Chart, and I would make a new sheet. And so now the chart is bigger, and it's got its own tab down here. And this way, your charts are always the same size, and they're bigger, and they look better, and they're easier to work with. And so this is what I like to do. All right, first thing, title. Hate titles. Select it, hit delete, it's gone. Horizontal bars, hate them. Select, delete, they're gone. Now, the fonts here are a little small, so I want them bigger. So you see that I've got the whole chart selected. You see how the little select thing has the whole chart selected? So I'm going to right click. No, I'm not going to right click. That's wrong. I'm going to click and select that chart, and I'll come up here to home, and I'm just going to increase the font size to about 14. And you see how those fonts got bigger. Awesome. Now, Excel does a crazy thing where for some reason it doesn't put the y-axis in. So I got to do that. So I'm going to click on that. Now this axis is selected. I'm going to right click, go to Format Axis, and you see this screen opens up over here. And so all the different things I can do for the axis I can do over here. I just want to draw in that axis. So I'm going to come up here to Fill in Line, and I need a line, and I need a solid line. But I don't want it to be blue. I want it to be black. And now when I look over here, you see I've got a nice y-axis. But of course, my x-axis doesn't match, which is crazy. So I'm going to select it, come over here to Format Axis, and do the same thing. Solid line, black, looks better. All right. Next thing is, I don't know, this is 1 and 2. What does that mean? Which one is right and which one is left? I need to properly label these. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to select the chart. I come up here to Design, and I have this Select Data. Select Data is where I'm going to tell it what to graph. So when I click on that, it's got the horizontal axis labels. And you see right now it's just saying 1 and 2 because it doesn't know what those are. Well, I'm going to edit this. And I'm going to come back over to where the data are. And here's the labels for those bars, right? So I'm going to select those cells. I'm going to hit OK. And now it's got them labeled correctly. Okay, we also need to know, like, here's a bunch of numbers. What do these numbers mean? I don't know. I need to label these axes. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to come up here, see this little plus sign? I'm going to hit that, and I'm going to add axis titles. And so the axis titles are on there now. And so what's the y-axis? It's mean number rows. And so when I click off, when I hit return, excuse me, now the y-axis is labeled. The x-axis is roll direction. And now they're labeled. And if I had units, I'd put units in, you know, the unit here is number. And so now I know what each of these axes are. Perfect. This is looking really good. The only thing we need is we've got central tendency, but we also need spread and sample size. We need to put the standard error on here. So we got to add error bars. So we're going to click on this and come back to the plus sign. And we're going to choose error bars. Now, here's the trick. See, so Google Sheets does not do a good job with these. So that's why we're not doing this in Google Sheets. And so it adds error bars, but these are not the correct error bars. Okay, these are not the correct values. So you have to be careful. You can't just add error bars. You have to add the correct error bars. And so if I click on the error bars, now I come over here, you see it says format error bars. So I know I'm working on the error bars, right? And so I want to find out what is actually being graphed here. So I click on this part, the error bar options, and you see it says it's doing the standard error. Oh, awesome, that's what I want. But it's wrong. It's giving you the wrong, it says it's doing the standard error, but it's not basing that on anything. And so this is the number one thing to learn. Excel will give you the wrong standard error. You have to tell it the right standard error, which is the one you calculated. So even though it says standard error here, this is not correct. You have to go to custom and put in your own values. And so I'm going to specify my value. Okay, and so I've got, what's the positive error bar and what's the negative error bar? I'm going to start with the positive one, get rid of everything that's in there. Now, where is the right value of standard error, the correct value of standard error? It's what we calculated. And I've got one for each group, so I select those cells, and that is the proper standard error. But that's only for the positive values. I also need the same thing for the negative values. So let me just do the same thing again. Negative value, it's still the same value. It's plus or minus one standard error. And so now I've set it to the proper standard error, and now I've got a proper graph. And so that's it. So now I've got a good looking graph. So what I want to do is I want to get this into Word. So let me launch Word. And what I like to do, there's several ways to do this, but this is how I like to do it, and it works very well, is I'm going to put a bunch of blank lines in. This makes life easier. And I'll come back up here. I'm going to go to my Excel sheet, click on my graph. You see I've got the whole graph selected. And I'm going to Control C, so now I've copied that graph. I'm going to come over here. Now I could just paste that straight in, and it looks pretty good, but I don't like that. Sometimes, it kind of links it to the Excel sheet, and the formatting's hard. I would rather do something called paste as an image or a picture. And so when I paste it as a picture, so this is just like a picture, like any other picture you would put in your Word document. And so I think it's easier to format this way. Some people don't like this. Some people like that it's linked, to have it linked. I don't really care. But so there I've entered my picture. I like to come up here to format and position. I like to be in front of text. No, I don't. Oh no, I don't want position. I want wrap text. I want it in front of text, which is what it's set to. That seems to work better for me. If you set it to in front of text, you can kind of drag it, and wherever you drop it, it'll stay. And I like that better. And so then I can click down here, and I can go figure 1, da 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 da. So there you go. That's how we're going to do this in Excel, and then paste it into Word. All right. Okay. And so that's it. So let's go ahead and just reiterate what all we've looked at now. So here's the figure that we created. This is from our example data. Yours will look different from your actual data. And so again, let's go through this and emphasize the things we're going to be looking for when we grade your figures, and we want you to make a proper figure. This graph is for comparing means. A bar graph is really good for that. Different types of data, different questions require different types of graphs. And so over time, you'll learn that. In Bio 216, you'll learn that quite a bit. We're doing a simple comparison of means here, so the bar graph is the best. Now you notice that both axes are labeled. And so this tells us what's on the x-axis, and it tells us what's on the y-axis. And it has the proper units. Now, you don't always have units, right? Roll direction doesn't really have a unit, right? It's not like centimeters or degrees or anything like that. And here, you've got the mean number of rolls. The unit is, number. And so that's good enough, all right? But if you were doing something like temperature or speed, you would need degrees Celsius or centimeters per second or something like that. So make sure you have both a label and a unit. You see there's no title on here. Do not like titles. You see the caption goes underneath, just like all the other figures we've done. And one thing you must do is you must tell the reader what these error bars are, okay? And so the caption tells us that this is the mean number of rolls, and so that tells us what we're actually graphing. The y-axis also tells us that. But we've got these error bars, and they're, you can use different things for error bars. You could use the standard deviation for error bars. You could use the variance. You could use the min-max. It depends upon what your story is and what you're trying to tell. We want to use the standard error. And so I got to tell people, error bars represent the standard error. You got to have that in your caption. And so does this contain the three things: central tendency, spread, and sample size? And it does, right? Standard error has both standard deviation and the n size built in. And so that's why we use standard error for graphing. At least that's why I use it. Not everybody agrees, and not everybody does things the same way, but this is how I do it. It's how I want you to do it. Okay, last question. Again, you need to think about, what's the dependent variable and what's the independent variable when you're doing these kinds of graphs. Well, the independent variable always goes on the x. Not always. There's times when you don't, in limnology and things like that. But in general, the independent variable goes on the x-axis and the dependent variable goes on the y-axis. So the mean number of rolls, depends upon which direction you're looking at. So again, you always want to make sure that you have those correctly. You always want to put the independent variable on the x-axis. Okay, so that's how you're going to take your data, you're going to put it in Excel, you're going to summarize it, you're going to make a figure, you're going to paste that into your homework document. If you got any questions, let me know. But that's it. All right, I'll talk to you later.